Welcome to the New Bedford Light Chat. Tonight we have the last of three campaign candidate forums. We had the at-large candidates last month, and on Monday night we had the ward candidates in the contested race. And last but not least, tonight we have the school committee candidates. Joining us are Rick Porter to my right, Marcus Coward in the Hollywood Square to lower right, and Vaughn Marie Moniz to the lower left. Melissa Costa, the incumbent, had agreed to be part of the forum, but she had some unexpected surgery this week and she's not quite up to par yet. So she sends her best to all her colleagues, and we wish her the best and hope she'll be back on the campaign trail soon. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks for
Hello,
having me.
hello.
Hi.
So, of all the races this year, I know the candidates in the school committee uh, contest the least. So I thought that we could start off by each of you telling me a little bit about yourself, what your life is like, what your background is, and why you decided to get into this race. So why don't we start with Vaughn Marie and tell us about yourself, Vaughn Marie?
Thank you. My name is Von Marie, and I am, well, first of all, I'm a mom. I have two kiddos, both in special education. I'm also the spouse of a paraeducator. And I have recently, well, about 2 years ago now, started a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So I work a lot with small businesses and doing a lot for the Hispanic community. Um, I decided to run because, like I mentioned, I'm a parent and I hear a lot of things of what's going on within the school system through my husband. So, one of the things that I find shocking is that there aren't a lot of active parents on the school committee now. And I really feel like that is an important voice to have, especially when, I'm actively a parent. I know some of the things that are going on, and I really want to continue that um, to move the needle forward on our kids and their education and their future.
Yeah, great. Are you from New Bedford, Vaughn Marie? Have you lived here a while?
So, so I actually grew up in Fall River, but so not too far. But when we decided to plant roots, we came over to New Bedford, and so we bought a house, and we've been living here for 4 years. And since then, I've really fully immersed myself in the business side. So I do a lot of work there, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to do more work with our kids.
And what's this Hispanic Chamber of Commerce? This is the first I'm hearing of it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so we are a Hispanic chamber, so we provide a lot of networking events, workshops. Um, we do things both in English and Spanish, so you don't have to be a Hispanic small business owner or entrepreneur to join. We accept allies too because it's not about separating ourselves. It's like we're a Hispanic chamber, so you can't join if you're not Hispanic. It's about creating that bridge. So someone that might not know about a small business, like Taqueria La Raza on Acushnet Ave. We're doing an event there, so hopefully they'll get to know some of those businesses where they might not set foot in before.
All right. Let's go to Marcus next. Marcus, tell us about yourself. I know you've had the cable access show for a while,
Yep.
but and I believe you did grow up in New Bedford. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Marcus Coward, running for school committee. I am born and raised in New Bedford. I'm 26, so I'm hoping to lead this generation that I'm in into being more involved in politics and just in a lifestyle of positivity. So I've served in the Army. I am also on the Human Rights Commission with Vaughn Marie. I volunteer with this organization called the New Bedford Health Initiative, where we meet once a month and give away free stuff. I worked as a paraprofessional at Nativity Prep downtown, which is the school that I went to. And currently, I am working at Youth Opportunities Unlimited, which is an after school program organization in New Bedford. And so why I started to run was after I was working at Nativity, I really got reconnected with what kids are going through right now. And as someone who is 26, I can relate to a lot of the issues that they're going through. And I think that I can provide a lot of new perspectives and ideas as to policies that the school committee can implement to really best serve these students.
Great. How did you like Nativity Prep, Marcus? I'm a big fan of Nativity Prep. I went to a prep school, full disclosure. But
And so I loved it. It was for the best years of my life, and it really helped set me up academically, but also in a confidence perspective as well, where I just learned so much about what it meant to be a young man in America and how to be professional and to have respect for others, but also for myself. And I guess thank you for just giving me the mic back. And I do just want to mention the show that you brought up before, my show, the Wake Up New Bedford. It's a show on Channel 95 public access, but also it's on YouTube. And so that's just another project that I started where I interview people and try and highlight people's stories in New Bedford to try and create some positive news for New Bedford that can hopefully inspire others to just pursue their passions. And so I hope that with me running, I can inspire people and I hope to win to continue to show young people that you can pursue, you know, big goals and dreams and that you can achieve them.
very good. And last but not least, Rick Porter. I know you have an educational background. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Rick Porter, and I'm a lifelong resident of New Bedford, a proud graduate of our public schools. I went to the Parker Elementary School. I went to the Old Keep Junior High School and graduated in 1986 from New Bedford High School. I've spent the past 35 years of my professional career as an educator, not in New Bedford, but in Dartmouth. I started out as an elementary school teacher, taught fifth grade for almost 20 years and spent the second half of my career as a school administrator. I was an assistant principal at the Quinn School and at the Potter School in Dartmouth, and I spent the last 5 or 6 years as the principal at Potter School. Also along the way, in the early 2000s, for about 4 years, I was the co-president of the Dartmouth Educators Association, which represented the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the secretaries, the nurses. And when I became an assistant principal, we were also organized into a collective bargaining group, and I was their president for about 4 years as well. The reason I'm running for school committee is I just recently retired. I retired in June after 35 years. And to be honest with you, for the past 53 years, in September, I've gone back to school. And this is the first year that I didn't do that. So over the summer, friends of mine, other people in the community, they said you should run for school committee again. I ran in 2017. And didn't work out then. Certainly hoping it will this time. But I feel like it's getting back into schools again, but on another side of the table, which I'm looking forward to. Part of also the reason I'm running is because of my 35 years of experience. So when they talk about things like standardized testing, school cultures, budgets, MCAS, student mental health, family engagement, those are things that I did in my everyday life as a teacher and as an administrator. And now I'm looking forward to seeing what that hopefully will be like on the other end of the table. I have been living with my husband. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary last week. And we've been living in our home here in New Bedford for 25 years now.
Very good. Well, this is an impressive group of candidates, as well as Melissa Costa, the incumbent, a social worker, an impressive person. I think we have all bases covered. We have a parent who has the experience of parents. We have a young person close to the age of the students, and we have a teacher and principal. So this is all great perspectives to have on the school committee. I want to start off with a little bit of a tough issue for the city and the state as a whole. We had a recent report that the MCAS scores for 10th grade especially were the lowest averages since 2021 this year. And far fewer New Bedford 10th graders even took the test. The principal of New Bedford High School was talking about students leaving answers open. There were some students that even wrote things like "I don't care" in the answers. So Superintendent O'Leary has said that some of it is concerning and it demands a strong strategy. What do you folks think we need to do? What is your perspective on these poor MCAS scores? Are MCAS overrated, or is this something we really should be looking into? Why don't we start off with Marcus?
So there's a couple ways to look at this. And so MCAS should not be the most heavily weighted measure of student success. So in that way, I would agree that it's overrated. But I would say that New Bedford students are struggling in different ways, MCAS measurements aside. And so Rick actually brought this up last night, and I think he'll have a great answer to this, but that if we change what we're measuring and also measure more frequently, then I think that we'll be able to accurately show our student success more. Because I think our students are being successful in many ways and maybe can improve on certain things, but the measurement we're using being the MCAS and only having the MCAS once a year was just an inaccurate way to truly measure our student success. And I like to think about students with learning disabilities and English language learner students as well, in acknowledging that there's not a knowledge gap between these kids with learning disabilities and English language learner students from maybe your traditional student and English student, but that accessibility to that success is what's really stunting them. So if we can reflect our student success in what we're teaching them and measure more regularly, and also just make a curriculum where they're more engaged and more interested in what they're learning, then I think we'll be able to see a lot more success in our students and be able to measure that more accurately than the MCAS.
Are there specific types of things that you would like to measure that you think would be more culturally fair or better measurements of success?
Sure. So the three things I would recommend for us to implement in our curriculum, if it's not there already, is AI literacy, financial literacy, and more local history, but also a culturally diverse history. And so we have so many students from different countries, but if we can implement that in our history classes, I think that one, they'll be more interested and then want to actually take these tests and engage, but then they'll also know more about what they're learning, and it won't just be all foreign knowledge. So I think they would be successful in that. I know a lot of people are interested in financial literacy, and so I'm not sure what the initial success rate will be, but I think the engagement will rise and then the success will follow that. And then with AI literacy, children and everyone from elementary school to college are currently using AI. And so I think if we start to measure how they're using it and how successful they are, then we'll see that our kids are smart and are learning things, but we just weren't measuring what they were doing before. So those would be my three things.
Okay. Rick Porter, Massachusetts has had a reputation as the highest scoring state in the nation in testing and very high standards. There were two sides of the MCAS question, teaching to the test and what it measures. But are you worried at all about these poor MCAS scores in 10th grade and a significant amount of students not even taking it?
Well, I mean, first of all, and we had a very thoughtful discussion last night at the NBA forum. I have big concerns with the MCAS testing. I have been involved with MCAS testing as a teacher that had to administer it and as an administrator who had to facilitate it in his buildings. The bottom line is it is a one-size test that's expected to fit all, and we have a very diverse group of learners from high academic performing students to, as Marcus mentioned, students who have disabilities and other concerns as well. So that is a huge problem with this test. And I used an analogy last night. If I have a serious illness and I go to my doctor and he says, I'm going to give you one test only, and I'm going to come back to you in a year to see how you're doing. I should have some real concerns about that because from one test only, you're going to make decisions on my health care. And that's really what MCAS is. MCAS is administered in maybe there's three subsets. There's math, there's ELA, there's science. Eventually, again, there'll probably be social studies. Each one of those sessions are maybe two. And then they don't get the results until September. So how useful is that? Now, what we tend to think is important as educators is that we do something called progress monitoring. So, for example, in the district I just worked at, and I'm sure it's very similar in New Bedford, you may administer different types of tests 3, 4, 5 times a year to the whole cohort of students. So you can get a real idea how students are doing up against their fellow peers. And these tests could be designed locally by educators. And they don't just test academic skill, which is all that MCAS tests. It also tests critical thinking and problem solving skills, skills that are necessary for kids to succeed in their careers. So I have great concerns when people say schools are underperforming, kids are not learning when we just rely on one measurement. I feel we need to be doing multiple measurements. And if all our coursework, which it is aligned to the Massachusetts curriculum standards, those assessments would have to be aligned as well. So if people are concerned that our assessments are going to be testing different things than they're testing in Boston or Springfield, no, because they all have to be aligned to the Mass frameworks. But when you actually have the local teachers and local educators designing those tests, Jack, you mentioned about different cultures and different learners. Those teachers can think the best way possible, whether it be multiple choice, whether it be writing, whether it be a portfolio, to see how kids are learning. So, and also too, I mean, we know that recently by an overwhelming vote, it no longer became a graduation requirement. So obviously the kids did not take it
Oh,
seriously. I
so
mean,
so is Superintendent O'Leary wrong when he says, quote, some of it is very concerning and demands a strong strategy?
Well, I would not I'm not going to say that I'm the expert on New Bedford issues, but I do feel like I have experience in dealing with children. If you put out there that this doesn't matter as much anymore because it by 10th grade kids had to be able to pass the MCAS in order to graduate. If they didn't pass in 10th grade, there were some other options for them to do to get that diploma. But by 10th grade, it became a high stakes test. The message was it wasn't high stakes anymore. So yeah, my concern whenever we give some sort of anything, a test or whatever, that people don't give their best effort. But let's really think about MCAS. Let's think about testing and say, what should we be doing differently? I'm sorry, am I still on? Because I just froze for a second.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I would ask all of us to try to stick to about 2 or 3 minutes in
Oh,
our
okay.
answers. But if you have another point you want to make, go ahead.
No, I want to just also say too, I mentioned this last night that some that's coming out of the governor's office and probably the Department of Ed is that they're thinking of what we could make for a graduation requirement. And unfortunately, it's looking a little bit like MCAS, just dressed up differently. So I think we need to get a wider representation of educators, community members, as we decide what it is locally or on a state level we need for a student to earn a high school diploma.
Okay. Vaughn Marie, the special ed students in particular, they were concerned about their scores in this last round and participation. I know that's an issue for you. What are your thoughts on this MCAS news? And you're on mute. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I keep it on mute just in case the dog or one of my kids is trying to break into this room. So I absolutely think MCAS is completely overrated. I mean, I failed by 1 point in 10th grade, and I had to spend a whole trimester working on it was like a specialized math class because I failed 1 point in math. And I had to spend a full trimester. And so if I had failed it again, which I didn't, but if I had failed it again, I had to continue in that class. So I absolutely think it's overrated. I do agree that we need some level of testing in order to, you know, Rick is completely right. If we say, oh, you don't need to do this testing in order to pass, kids are going to be like, okay, great. I don't have to do it. I think it's part of the student accountability, which is something that we talked about yesterday. So how do we continue to keep them accountable to some of the things that they need to get done? Because at the end of the day, they do need to get this education. I also think that COVID had something to do with how our students are learning. So we really need to kind of take a look at that and see how we can adjust. And I absolutely agree. We should leave it to the local districts to figure out this is what we're teaching, this is how we're going to teach, this is what we have to absolutely teach, and this is the direction that we're taking. So it's not a one size fits all
Okay.
like the MCAS.
I might be in the minority here because I was a supporter of MCAS, but does anybody see any value in keeping the test at all?
If I could just jump in, I want to be clear. I am definitely a supporter of making sure that we are monitoring kids' progress so we know that they're learning. I think the problem with MCAS over the years is that it has become too much of a political stone that's been thrown out there and stuff. So is it truly measuring how kids learn? That I do wonder. And that's why I think we need to have an overhaul. And that's where we need to also, I think, bring it back to local control as well, too.
Okay. Marcus?
And just to add on to that, I agree with Rick that it is really important to have a metric to measure student success, but I think that a huge problem as well was the MCAS forcing teachers to teach towards a test rather than teaching the material and the curriculum, which I think the teachers found very frustrating, but then the students were just getting a disservice as far as for their learning as well, I feel like.
Okay. Well, Marie, any final thoughts? So,
I would completely agree. I think like I mentioned, we do need a level of, set accountability for our students. How do we measure it? The MCAS itself, you know, maybe not, but something else that can replace it.
all right, let's move on to another issue. All of you are on record in favor of the district continuing its diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI curriculum and hiring and administration. But we have seen at the national level, the President of the United States, really trying to get rid of DEI at the college level, threatening to take money away from federal money away from the colleges. I worry that next may be the federal funding that assists, particularly urban districts like New Bedford, because of DEI. Does anybody have a strategy as to how the district would fight if the national administration continues to crack down on DEI and issues? Rick, you want to start with that?
Well, thank you, Jack, for the question. I mean, it baffles me. I think about when I ran for school committee 8 years ago. If we were having a conversation where we were saying that things like diversity, equality, inclusion, belonging are bad things, we would have thought that person was off their rocker. I'm sorry to say. So it amazes me because in my previous school district that I worked at, just a year and a half ago, we as administrators were being trained in thinking about DEI and how we bring that to our everyday practice, how we look at our protocols and our procedures and what levels of structural racism might also be there as well. So it blows my mind that it has now become almost like a dirty war. Of course, when you're hiring, you want to find the best candidate possible. But I have a problem even with the word the best candidate. Sometimes you're looking for the best match possible as well. And when you're hiring teachers, as a school department does, you got to really think of representation. That is very important. I know that Vaughn Marie was talking last night about relationships with kids and with their teachers and stuff like that. So you got to think about that community school if they have a high ELL population. At the elementary level, you have to think there's not many male teachers. Marcus is doing a great job talking about the young voters. I've made it a point in my hiring to think sometimes we need to think about younger teachers, enthusiastic teachers. So you have a diverse set of people so that all kids will find their place in the world there. So now in
So
terms of like,
what can we do if some of this money that the ELL and uh, uh, special ed programs disappears?
we need to make sure that our legislators, it amazes me that some of our legislators that work in Washington are not fighting back hard enough to say That is not appropriate. And I'm not going to say where it is, maybe in business or other sectors. That's not my place to do. But in education, I think, as for the reasons I just laid out, it is very, very important. So I think we need to lobby our congressmen down in Washington to say this is not appropriate for the federal education dollars that we should be getting that would be tied to taking away DEI, and that would impact our budgeting. I think the advocacy of working with our legislators is going to be important.
Very good. Vaughn Marie, are you worried about the federal money that supports the DEI programs? As I said, like ELL and special ed disappearing, and ideas what we could do, whether it's private, nonprofit sector, or what could we do?
Yeah. Like Rick mentioned, representation absolutely matters, you know, and I use my story a lot. I am Hispanic. I grew up in a Spanish speaking home, and growing up in Fall River in a school that was predominantly white, I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. You know, it was really difficult at times, and I learned very early on to just kind of camouflage in the background, and just kind of keep my head down and continue the work until I got into college, and then it kind of opened up my eyes. Like, it's okay to be myself. I think that DEIAB is very important. We need to get creative. Adding on to what Rick said, yes, get our legislator involved, but how do we get local organizations to kind of work with us? So maybe it's they write us into a grant, you know, creating some of these programs, or just continue to include into the curriculum some of those stories that we want to hear, and continue to include DEIAB into the school system. So I think that's a way to fight it. And Massachusetts, I think we're strong and feisty. So I think that we're gonna be okay. We're gonna come out of this okay, as long as we continue to fight.
Yeah. Marcus, just a lot of progress has been made in New Bedford with the ELL programs, other diversity programs. Do you have thoughts on what we can do to preserve it or replace it if the Washington continues to cut back on aid to education?
Yeah, so it is concerning. It really is concerning to see the amount of damage that this current administration has done to education in this country already. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. In fact, it looks like it will get worse. But I completely agree with what my colleagues Rick and Valerie said about one, how important representation, how important that is, but then also that we need to fight back. That I think that solutions might just be, and there aren't easy solutions, but patience in trying to wait it out. And there are so many lawsuits against the current administration in terms of if what they're doing is even legal, but just trying to see if we'll eventually get that money back, but not capitulating in any way of what our values are as a city or a state in fighting the good fight, and in terms of replacing what programs may be lost in the meantime. Rick brought this up before in terms of creating a smart budget. And we really do have to start thinking about our future in worst case scenarios and how we can prepare in the future in terms of curriculum and in infrastructure as far as for how we are going to take care of these kids, because it's not an easy solution or a simple one, but one, unfortunately, I think we do need to prepare for.
All right. So let's move on to a new topic. Vaughn Marie, the superintendent has said quite a bit about the money for the district, the New Bedford district, being often siphoned off to the voc tech and the charter schools. I want to emphasize that those are public schools, but the superintendent's and other people's complaint has been that they choose their student bodies, that they choose who gets into those schools, so that they may not be taking all of the special ed, all of the ELL students, although they do take some, and they have made efforts to do that. But not as much as the district as a whole. And the money is being siphoned off. We have three big charter schools and a big regional vocational school in New Bedford. Do you have thoughts as to how the district can improve its share of the state aid to education pie?
Yes. So when it comes to the school budget, I do have to admit I have to really educate myself on these things. But what I do know is that there needs to be a lot of communication between the school committee and the city councilors to kind of I don't know if educating them is the right word for it, but continue to have that open dialogue. What is it that we can do for the New Bedford Public Schools? I know Voc and Charter, public schools, but how can we reallocate some of those funds to the students that need it? How do we keep that? So I think it's just going to be a lot of open dialogue, um, and hopefully we'll see some changes.
Marcus, is there anything that can be done about New Bedford losing this share of the money? Now, again, they are public school students, but they are public schools that the superintendent has complained are not doing as much as the district in terms of the total population that's available, and New Bedford losing money, part of its budget to these schools. Do you have any thoughts on how that problem could be solved?
Only to not only advocate for public schools and how important they are, or to advocate for the progress and the good work that they're doing already, but also to just try and constantly improve the public school system in ways that can even advantage kids to go there, to create incentives for students to go there. And that goes back to the curriculum. I mean, a great way to start is by offering different programs. And I know that and to be a champion for the arts. So I think that our marching band just won, and I'm pretty sure the New Bedford High soccer team just won a title. So we have different programs, whether it's sports or arts, that are very not just popular but successful in the New Bedford school program. So I think really advocating and promoting that can also help get more students inside public schools and shift that reputation. I think that no matter what, we're going to be losing as a public school system some money to those charter schools. But I think the only way to combat that is to update the curriculum, update the programs to show that we are still offering things that sometimes these charter schools aren't, and to just do the best that we can with what we have.
All right. Rick, what are your thoughts? Is New Bedford unfairly losing a portion of its budget to these charter schools and the regional voc tech schools that don't have to educate the wide swath of students that the district does?
Well, I think in general, I mean, we all have concern whenever we're taking money away from the school department budget, that does become a level of concern. That being said, I mean, charter schools have found a niche. Clearly, there for some students and for some families, their programming is what's meeting their needs. And I've always been an advocate that we should be looking at what charter schools are doing, and not just charter schools. We should be looking at parochial schools. Marcus mentioned Nativity Prep, which is an amazing model. We should look what they're doing and see how we can replicate that and make school make a pathway for all our students. Now, in terms of the problem with it, though, when a child goes to a charter school, their money, so let's just say, I'm just going to use a hypothetical number here. Let's say the child's per pupil expenditure is $500, and boom, when that child leaves, boom, that money goes with them. But what doesn't change is that the cost of the teacher doesn't change, the utilities don't change, all those fixed expenses don't change. But what happens is that budget gets chipped away. Now, I'm happy to hear that our Congressman Tony Cabral has recently introduced some legislation to talk about how we have a local cap that will happen, because we have to still remember that those kids that go to charter schools are still public school kids. But how can we make sure we're minimizing what's happening to the overall public school budget, and what amount is actually the state going to be kicking in as well? Because the regulations for charter schools are dictated by the Department of Ed. Now, Jack, you also mentioned Voc Tech, and I do have a concern there as well, because it doesn't make a level playing field for all our schools when they're able to kind of do some self-selection of students that will be going there. Now, I know that there's some of the lottery system right now that might be happening. I think that's going to be looked at carefully. But being someone who's a little bit older, I mean, I have friends of mine who had successful careers because they went to Greater New Bedford Voc. I have a concern now that some of those kids who would excel in the trade career path are not getting in. And that is so, so important. So I think it's a big issue. I think it needs to be looked at holistically, but I think we also take a good look at ourselves and to make sure in our public schools, are we meeting the needs of people that are choosing to go somewhere else? I've had that conversation with families who've opted for school choice. School choice is the same thing. It takes the money out and goes to another district. So if they're choosing to leave, we have to ask the question, why, and how can we do things differently?
Yeah, the mayor has talked quite a bit about the vote tech in particular, taking a lower percentage of Latino students than the general population, and that affect taking some of these students affects the diversity of the New Bedford district because they take, students that sometimes have less challenges than the students that don't go there. I want to move on to another issue if I could. New Bedford has some of the oldest school buildings in the state. We have 6 elementary schools that are 100 years old. We have a high school that is 50 plus years old. Brockton has already built a new high school. Fall River has already built a new high school. Meanwhile, New Bedford has not even gotten through its 100-year elementary schools. The superintendent was recently up at the School Building Authority talking about the difficulty of suburbs being able to get schools built quicker than urban centers because they can afford the taxes that are needed. In other words, the state aid should be more weighted toward the urban schools. Marcus, do you have any concerns that New Bedford has not gotten its share of new school buildings because of the way the state's formula works?
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point about the property taxes. And this is too big of an issue just for New Bedford, but it really should be talked about more often how big of a problem coupling the funding for schools to the property taxes of houses, and that it just makes an unfair system to where suburban schools can be made faster because they have more funding, or they just have better facilities or more people and staffing, that it just creates this unfair balance to where people will start to have a preference on where they want to live based off of what school their child will go to. And if we should be striving to create a more equal playing ground for all the schools. And so um if you can just repeat your question again,
Yeah,
Jake.
well,
Sorry.
I'm just saying, so what the solution is this, obviously the state legislature has to uh, um, change the formula that they use to decide who gets the money for building new schools. And right now, as I understand it, all the schools are competing in the same formula, no matter how affluent the district. And
Yeah.
so the superintendent has, done a lot of work testifying to the state to change that. But are there more things that can be done to get a fairer deal for New Bedford?
And I'll bring it up again, just creating a smart budget to try and get any money we can to put towards infrastructure. That so much of it has to go towards personnel and salary, but the infrastructure in New Bedford public schools needs to be updated. We're way behind track, and we do need to make that a higher priority. It's just hard with the limited funding we have, and we have a lot of things that we need to address.
Okay. Rick, you're a New Bedford guy, but you spent your career in suburban school systems in Dartmouth. Is the state formula for school building fair, or does it need to be adjusted as the superintendent says? And are you concerned about the aging infrastructure in some of New Bedford schools? Rick.
Well, yes, I am concerned about the aging infrastructure. I find it interesting, Jack, that you were mentioning the suburbs because, like you had said, I spent my entire professional career in Dartmouth. And if you look at building construction in Dartmouth, I mean, granted, there's less schools compared to building construction in New Bedford. In that regard, New Bedford has done a much better job. The building that I was principal of is getting very close to being its 70th anniversary. And besides the high school,
Bedford
it's
has
one of their newer,
New Bedford has
believe it.
600 year
So
old. New Bedford has
I'm
600 year
sorry, what you,
schools. New Bedford has 600 plus year
oh no, no, and
elementary
like
schools.
I said, like I said, I know Dartmouth definitely does have less schools, but like I said, at least I'm seeing schools being built in New Bedford. And Marcus mentioned a good point about the property taxes, but I also think that we need to make sure, and I know the issue in Dartmouth had been was that the per pupil expenditure was incredibly low, one of the lowest in the states. So if a community is going to value education, then they might need to be paying a little bit more. But in terms of the state formula, if we don't look at buildings as just a local issue, we look at it as a state issue, there should be some sort of registry that would almost say, looking at the oldest schools in the Commonwealth, looking at schools that have had the most infrastructure repairs on these old buildings. In some cases, you're throwing out a lot of money when you're making major repairs to buildings like you mentioned, Jack, are almost 100 years old. So I think because the money is coming from the state building authority, I think we should also be looking at that formula and looking at holistically across the state. Where are our oldest school buildings? And you're right, we should not have any children going to school buildings that are 100 years old. Now, that also being said, we have to give a huge shout out to our maintenance staff, which have done an amazing job. I've seen it in Dartmouth. I know what's happening in New Bedford, how they've taken these very old buildings and made them work as best they can for students of today. But that being said, I mean, some of these buildings may also not be very healthy as well either, just given their age. So I think the state needs to take a look at their formula on all the buildings that are very, very old and prioritize it a little bit differently.
Juan Marie, do you have thoughts as to how New Bedford could replace some of these old elementary schools and the high school that is, much older than, I mean, has not been replaced when other districts have replaced their high schools? You're on mute.
Haven't done that in a while.
That's okay.
Yeah. So yeah, in addition to what Marcus and Rick already mentioned, I know one of the schools that the elementary schools that my son is attending, they actually made the decision to move all of the kids in the sub-separate classrooms to a different school, a larger school, and I think that's one way that they're trying to maybe fix the problem or put a band-aid over the problem. So I don't know if there are any other schools that did that transition, but I think that's one way. Merging schools, I think that's another way because I do know that the school that he was moved from is eventually going to become, they're going to be merging two schools. I don't necessarily know how to feel about that. Although our building is very small, it's a neighborhood school. I did like that, all of the kids were in the neighborhood pretty much. And is it better to have all of the kids in the same school? I don't know. So those are things that I still have to really think through. But I think if we're going to raise things like property taxes on our houses, I think we need to advocate, continue to educate the community because, of course, if we say we're going to raise this, then we're going to have a lot of questions. But why is it important? Why do we need to put so much focus on the education? Our kids are our future, so we need to invest in the kids because we're leaving our legacy to them. So how do we help bring them up? So it's a great question.
Is it possible that new buildings are overrated a little bit? We had a very old school, the Congdon School, that did very well academically.
I don't disagree with you, Jack, because I
Oh,
think
uh,
Vaughn Marie makes a good point. I think sometimes we get too caught up in just the infrastructure and we kind of ignore what's going on inside. And Vaughn Marie makes a great point. Even though the merging of schools, it makes more sense financially. I mean, you're pulling all your resources together, not just utilities, but also staffing. But you are losing that bit of a neighborhood school feel. When I was in Dartmouth, I was the union leader at the time. Two smaller schools combined into the Quinn School, and at the time we had over 1,100 students. Now, we certainly had a lot of resources that were available, but it was very much a mega school, and it probably did lose a little bit of that neighborhood feeling.
yeah, I'll just say that I took a tour of the 100-plus-year-old Mount Pleasant School a few years ago, and I think they fixed this problem since then. But almost all the computer work was being done in one room because the old building just wasn't equipped for the power. I think they fixed that, but it still, has a number of problems. Rick, New Bedford is already a minority majority school district. The city is not minority majority yet, but the school district is. And yet, an overwhelming majority of the teachers and administrators are white. Uh, it's not that the district hasn't tried. It has a number of outreach programs, but it still has not succeeded in bringing more uh, people of color into these teaching positions. Do you have any strategies that might help that?
Well, we mentioned earlier, I'm a big proponent that representation is important, and not just within our in our with our teachers. I think also with our administrators as well, because as we're looking for students to see representation in their teachers, we're looking for staff to see representation into their supervisors as well. I will say, and this goes into another probably discussion about, competitive wages. I know as an principal who's had to hire people, we used to say that there used to be a hiring pool. Lately, what it's become is like when you spray the Windex against the window and that kind of runs off. Sometimes that's all you're getting in terms of people. So one, I think we need to make looking, like I said, at our wages, at our benefits packages, because I think sometimes we're losing people where they can see something better somewhere else because they have to raise their families. So that needs to be looked at as well. But maybe we need to do more outreach in trying to find teachers of color and different minorities. And like I said before, younger teachers who speak different languages. So I think better outreach would need to be done. But as someone who's been hiring people the last 5 years, and I know Vaughn Marie mentioned COVID before, I will say the hiring pool has shrunk into a little bit of a shallow pool lately.
Bon Marie, how important do you think it is for Black and Latino children to see Black and Latino teachers, administrators, male teachers, which there aren't that many of? Do you think that's a problem for the city's district, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's absolutely important. It goes without me saying. We need representation. Representation definitely matters. And I think, one example that I always think about is in elementary school, I had a teacher that was teaching Spanish and she was not Hispanic, which I know people go to school for it and they can learn it, which is great. But what about the culture, the background? You know, the Spanish that was taught is not the Spanish that I speak at home. So it
Yeah.
was just it doesn't really um it doesn't connect, right? We need younger teachers, we need male teachers, we need more representation from the Black and Brown community. In order to do that, Rick, every time he mentions this, I'm like, yes, because my husband is a paraeducator and I think our their health insurance is great, but compensation not so much. So we need to have better benefit packages, better compensation for those folks. Right now, my husband's going through the JET program, which is for all paraeducators. They have to be paraeducator in the city for a certain amount of time, and they get these grants to go through school. He's doing that right now, but how can we take that a little bit further? Do we have something specifically for Black and Brown educators? How can we help them a little bit more? Sometimes we just need a little help from our allies in order to move the needle in our future. So those are some of the things that I think would be really helpful. And advocating. I'm always big on advocating and communication. If we're out there searching and letting people know, hey, you can make a difference in a child's life. What is this a career that you see yourself in? Let's continue to educate and advocate for our schools and our kids.
All right. Marcus, how important is it that Black and Latino children see Black and Latino teachers, young boys see male teachers, and what could we do to change that?
So yeah, I think it's very important to have our diverse student population be reflected in our teaching and administration. And I think that also is really a big reason for why we should stand by our DEI values and why we shouldn't capitulate or be overly fearful that obviously the administration doesn't like it, but that doesn't mean that we're in the wrong for believing in it. So really standing by those DEI principles. But also just incentivizing for those diverse teachers who either are bilingual or young or a person of color. And I don't know too much about contract negotiations or collective bargaining or unions. That's something that I do want to learn more about, and that's something I'm very much willing to listen and inform my opinion on. But I mentioned it before that I don't know how this would go with the union or if there's other ways to incentivize it, but even if it's just giving a slightly higher base pay for teachers who are bilingual or who do meet certain requirements to try and create a more diverse teaching pool that in whatever ways that we can incentivize it that wouldn't be too controversial but people would still be for. I'm all for it because that is a really high priority for me is to have a just as diverse of a teaching pool as a student pool.
All right. So I have a little bit of a tough question here. I sense that this group is very much pro, and I think we all are, fair pay and good pay and benefits for our teachers. But New Bedford is a working class city. Many of the property taxpayers, the people who own homes in this city, are lower middle class people, working class people, and they have a hard time paying for their property taxes. So how would you balance, if elected, how would you balance the needs of raising the school budget to what it needs to be versus not overburdening the property taxpayers who have to pay for it? A lot of it is paid by state aid, but every year that gets to be less. Let's start with Von Marie with this question. How do you balance the need for the school budget to pay for these teachers versus the property taxpayers, many of whom are working class people?
It's a good question and a tough question because I feel like the immediate answer that comes is, we have to um, give higher cost of living wages, right? I mean, that kind of is what would help us continue to afford the things that we have. Um, I think we just take a good look at the budget, continue the open communication with our legislator, uh, and I think that's how we do it. That's a great question. That's a tough one for me to answer, really. Is how do you do it?
I can't pretend to have the answers myself, but I think sometimes we get a little glib about it. And as a journalist, I hear from both sides of the equation. So I thought I would put that out. Marcus, what do you think? How do we uh, uh, do what we need to do by the teachers, do right by the teachers, and also do right by the property owners of New Bedford?
Yeah, so it is hard because we need to invest in our youth. And so we still need to maintain a healthy education budget. But you are right in bring up those very real concerns of people paying, and it's a working class city, so people paying those very high prices when it comes to taxes or even just rents and mortgages. And so even though it is a very real concern, I don't know if there's much that the school committee can do about it. If there is, I'm interested to learn how. But I think that is more of a societal problem when it comes to just the low wages and still with the increasing cost of living and the increase of prices of mortgages and rents that it is just becoming more and more expensive to live. And I don't know if the school committee can do much to alleviate that stress, but it is a real concern.
Rick Porter, how do you balance those two interest groups? The children who need the best teachers possible. We don't want teachers to leave for the suburbs, but we also have a property tax base that is not as affluent as some of the surrounding communities.
Well, as my fellow candidates here have mentioned, if it wasn't a problem, then that's why we're discussing it. It's not an easy solution. It's a double-edged coin here, really. I mean, one, I think we need to educate the community of the importance of having a well-funded education system, but we have to also be mindful of the fact that we can't overburden them to make sure that they're going to be forced out of the city or forced out of their home because of rising costs. And I think we also need to look at rising costs on families. I mean, so this is just outside the school, but I mean, looking at the price of groceries these days, utilities, the cost of healthcare. I mean, all of that, that's where you need to have like a comprehensive approach when you're talking about expenses, not just with school department, but with other leaders as well. But that being said, yes, we need to make sure, like, for example, our paraprofessionals, those who are working with our most diverse students, are getting a living wage. No employee should be having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to be able to support their family because they're being a paraprofessional. So we need to make sure that's happening. But it's not always just about what their salary is. It's taking a look at other things like healthcare, because I know healthcare every year goes up more and more and more, and that can get a bit out of control for people who are trying to budget. It also takes a look at our budget items as well too. Every position, every item in our budget, we should be taking a look saying, what is the positive impact on students? Because if we're going to be entrusted to have the money of the taxpayers, we have to make sure that we're spending it efficiently. So it does require a real close look at our budget as well. But it's not an easy issue. Everyone that has an opinion on it has an opinion because it's affecting their daily lives. So I think it's part of a broader conversation, especially with expenses that families are having to pay now as well too.
Okay, let me put this question out to and this will be the last question. I'll let you have some time to wrap up. New Bedford this year, as we know, passed the safe zone. The school committee passed the safe zone to protect undocumented immigrants and not share their information, and to make sure the superintendent is apprised of anybody that comes to the schools, looking for undocumented immigrants. But it strikes me that a lot of the children and their parents in the schools system are very stressed at this point and may have some psychological needs that are going to need to be addressed because of their insecurity. And has anyone had thoughts about how we can, do something to make sure that these people who are our neighbors and people working in our community are are doing okay in the midst of this crackdown on undocumented immigrants? That's for anybody that wants to answer first.
Well, if I could just jump in, I've had some experience in dealing with children who have. Last year, we had families that crossed the border from Mexico. They ended up in Colorado. They were then in Boston, and eventually they relocated down here. Now, I have no idea what their immigration status was, but I'm fully supportive of the safe school resolutions because when kids come to school, our only job at that point is to make sure are their basic needs being met? Are they being cared for? Are we very much aware who their families are? And are we making sure that they're going home to their families that night? And schools are just naturally welcoming places. So when we had those families come last year, I mean, they went to the school to get information like, where can they get some financial assistance? Where can they get work assistance? Where can they get food? So we need to make sure that we're keeping schools that level of safety for all kids and for all families as well. And Jack, you mentioned it, and we talked about it last night. The amount of trauma that is being heaped upon these children by this administration's immigration policy is ridiculous. And it's going to be felt for years and years to come. Now, I've also seen it with kids, for example, whose parents have been involved with law enforcement, who's at the end of the day, they weren't sure, am I going home to mom, dad, or am I going to a foster home where I don't know anybody? So how could you expect them to be focused on, what they want to be focused on in school? So that's what we need to make sure we try to make sure that schools are just that welcoming place. If they have to do their job, those ICE agents, fine, do your job. We're not doing it for you.
All right, Aunt Marie, do we need to look into some programs for the trauma that some of our immigrant students and their families are experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what Rick had mentioned that the families that they go to the school. Yes, I was born in New Jersey, moved to Fall River in 97, and the first thing that my mom did was go to church and go to the school. And those are the two biggest places, safe zones that there are for someone that's coming from a different place. So the schools have to be a safe zone. I'm completely in favor of it. There's no need for anybody to come in and disrupt. It's not just traumatic for the kids that are going through it, but their friends, the staff, everybody involved, everybody that sees their neighbors. It's something big. It goes way beyond the trauma that the student themselves and their families are facing. We should really focus on training for our staff. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. Trauma-informed training, some more professional development, and just some training to give them some clarity if any of the immigration issues kind of arise. Um, Working together with the local organizations, especially places like the CEDC here in New Bedford, that would be really beneficial as well. And we need patience as well.
Marcus, the superintendent has talked about the immigrant community as being a strength to the city, not a detriment. That they bring a lot of hard workers and intelligence and ideas to the community, but a lot of them may be stressed out and traumatized now. What can we do about some of the things that are going on?
Yeah, so that trauma and that fear is very real in those communities that have been impacted. So getting more trauma experts, whether those are guidance counselors or mental health professionals that can come in to talk with either the students or the teachers that are affected, and then just having more trauma related professional development as well for the teachers so that they can be equipped to deal with the issues that students are facing or can at least look out for the signs so that they can refer them to the right people. And I think it really does just start with both the safe zone resolution, with laying out just a blanket statement with showing support for those families to know that we do stand with them and we'll do whatever we can in order to support them. And the last part of that is mutual aid, is trying to work with the people along with the communities in ways that are more community based and person to person and less systemic, but more relationship based. So there are a lot of groups that are out here really connecting with the families affected and trying to find grassroots ways to grassroot ways to support them. And I think that the school committee should be doing the same in whatever ways possible and whatever time that we have to show our solidarity with these families and communities impacted.
Okay, well, this hour has flown by.
Yeah.
Very interesting conversation. I feel like I've gotten to know all of you a little bit better. Let me give you each a minute or so to have any final thoughts or maybe a topic that I didn't cover or get to and something you'd like to say about it. Rick, you want any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, Jack, thank you. Thank you to the New Bedford Light, your listeners out there. And once again, thank you to Vaughn Marie and Marcus, and we're sending our best wishes to Melissa as well. This has been a great time tonight because it felt very conversational, as opposed to just more of a forum kind of setting. So I did appreciate that. But in closing for me, I'm Rick Porter. I'm running for school committee. I'm a lifelong resident of New Bedford. I went to the New Bedford Public Schools. I've spent the last 35 years in public education as a teacher, a union leader, and a school principal. So when I think about if I'm fortunate enough to be elected to the school committee, it's those values that will guide me at every decision. I believe children deserve a safe and inclusive place to learn. I believe families need to be heard because they are the ones that are going to be the best advocates for their children. And I feel that staff need to be respected. We need to make sure they have the resources, and we need to make sure their voices are heard as we have some real pressing issues that are going to be coming up and challenges for our schools. So I thank you again for tonight, and I would appreciate your support on November 4th.
All right. Well, Marie, do you have final thoughts that you'd like to wrap up and say to the voters?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jack, and everybody at the New Bedford Light. It's been a real pleasure getting some things done with you all. And thank you for giving us the space to kind of talk through some of these things. So in closing, my name is Von Marie Monis. I'm a mother, a small business advocate, a proud Latina, and voice for the Hispanic community. I've spent years working alongside entrepreneurs and community leaders to solve problems and open doors. That same passion and commitment is what I expect to bring to the school committee. So, if elected, I will focus on improving communication with parents, specifically around special education, because that can get a little tough. Expanding resources for educators and staff, because if we treat our educators and staff well, they're going to feel supported, and that's going to trickle down to our students who are our future. And making sure that our schools are safe, welcoming, and inclusive for every student. I'll lead by listening, asking tough questions, and working collaboratively to serve all of our kids. This campaign is about making sure every family feels heard, every student feels seen, and every educator feels valued. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you for enlightening me about how to pronounce your last name. I've been saying Moniz
It could,
all the time.
it's
So,
okay. Moniz works too. Moniz works too.
very good. And Marcus, some final thoughts that you'd like to share with the voters.
Sure. So, Jack, thanks again, and thank you to New Bedford Light for hosting this. Thank you, everyone, for watching. So, I'm Marcus Coward, running for a school committee. And so, a vote for me is a vote for investing in New Bedford's youth in our future. And I want to run not just because this is my city, but I care. I truly want to help inspire other young people to get involved because it's going to take us to continue to run this city for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And I've been preparing for this position by going to school committee meetings. I work as a paraprofessional at Nativity Prep. I currently work at Youth Opportunities Unlimited, working with young children after school. And I think my greatest strength is being able to relate to what students are going through as a student in the 21st century. That things have changed so much since the 90s to the early 2000s. And it takes a real understanding perspective that you've either seen or lived through to know and relate to what these students are going through and their issues. So I think that I can bring that relevant, new, fresh perspective to the school committee if I'm elected. And the biggest issue that I would like to bring to the forefront of the school committee and schools is AI literacy. I think it's going to be the most important thing for students to prepare for to get them ready for the workforce. And so me having that young perspective and understanding to the importance of I think will be a real asset to the school committee and public schools in New Bedford. So please remember to vote November 4th. And if you want to invest in New Bedford's youth, please give me your vote. Thank you.
Well, this has just been a great discussion. I really feel like I've gotten to know all of you a little better, and I already know Melissa Costa a little bit. These are three quality candidates, and this has been just a great opportunity to help you get your message out. This is Jack Spillane for the New Bedford Light Chat. Thanks for watching.